As Dean Julian Triggs noted, the Four Corners program that aired in May of this year awakened Aussies to the horrors of overseas export and slaughter. At Voiceless, we've been aware of that that's only the tip of the iceberg regarding animal suffering, and there's plenty of suffering here at home during the long lives or sometimes short-lived lives of factory farmed animals. And we should be instead looking inward at home for immediate, urgent reforms. Given the state of conditions for farm animals in Australia and the lack of any legal protections for them here, it's no surprise why we brought Peter out here to talk about the progress being made in the EU, in the hopes we can hold it up as a model for making similar advances for animal welfare here. To provide a little bit of perspective, let me speak first by considering the number of people in this country there are compared to the number of farm animals who are being used for food. The population of Sydney proper is 4 million currently, although I understand a new census is going on right now. And for all of Australia is about 22 million people. Consider that as of 2005, which is the most recent year that the Department of Ag, Fish and Forestry did their stock take, there were 540 million animals being farmed here annually. And that includes 419 million poultry or chickens, 94 million sheep, 24 million cattle, and 2.5 million pigs. That's a huge population undergoing these factory farmed conditions. We're not talking about old McDonald's farm anymore. We are talking about large corporate factory farms right here in Australia, where conditions are, as you saw on many of Peter's slides this evening. It bears repeating that Peter's speech noted that in the EU, the mandate for proper treatment of animals comes from the top down. It's included in the Treaty for the Functioning of the EU, where animals are recognized as sentient beings and the member states are required to pay full regard to the welfare of animals. Here in Australia, our Constitution leaves issues of animal welfare to the states to legislate, unless it concerns an issue that crosses state lines, such as slaughter, live export, or the transport of animals. The rest of our cruelty laws are adopted and enforced at the state level, and these laws generally exempt farm animals from their protections. So the cruelty laws that you would see in the states that apply to dogs and cats are specifically written to not include farm animals. The EU also has the benefit of its independent science panel to research and help drive recommendations for the treatment of farm animals. Here we find that most research regarding our food animals is either contracted and paid for by the primary animal industries, who naturally have an eye on maximizing profits and minimizing costs over welfare, or the research is done by the government, such as the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries, and Forestry, whose concern is focused on food safety and supporting the food industry, and not on animal welfare. Instead, here in Australia, what we have are model codes of practice which were developed in the 1980s and which serve merely as recommendations or guidelines and do not have the full force and effect of laws. Apparently, the thinking at the time was that by implementing recommendations or these model codes is that they could be modified from time to time as agricultural practices changed, and would be easier to do rather than trying to legislate change if these codes of practice or standards were encased in a law. However, in practice, that's proved not to be the case. The codes that were drafted then basically entrenched the current practices of what farmers had always done, basically saying we've always done it before, so we're going to continue doing it now. Those became our codes, and for the most part remain the codes today. They're very, very rarely updated. The most recent one was the model code for pigs, which was done a couple years ago. My understanding, it'll be a few years before the next code is updated. These model codes then are inconsistently adopted and modified by each of the states in their own manner, and then become the state standards, again, not enforceable in any way. These model codes can work as either a sword or a shield in animal cruelty cases, and by that I mean they can be used as a shield or a defense in cruelty cases if a farmer can show they've complied with the code. So if the farmer is charged with cruelty to his animals and he can say, but look, I followed the model code in doing what I was doing and this is in there, then that's a basic defense for them. That's good enough in most cases. Similarly, it can be used as a sword, as evidence of cruelty if they've somehow veered off of what the codes require. but they are otherwise unenforceable. Failure to follow them has no penalties or consequences for farmers. As I said, they've been developed to entrench animal handling standards at the time they were adopted, and there's been very little changes in the meantime, despite the advances of agriculture and our own advances in understanding the welfare and needs of animals. Enforcement of these model codes in Australia is unlike most countries where enforcement is done by police organizations and/or trained humane officers. Here in Australia, enforcement of the model codes is typically done by the RSPCA if, in fact, a violation can be documented. However, the RSPCA is, as we know, a privately funded charitable organization at the mercy of its donations and its fundraisers, and can also have priorities and connections in conflict with their duty to enforce the codes and cruelty laws. Nowhere does it say that the police or any other kind of independent agency is charged with enforcing these codes. So there are some inherent conflicts with that. And also perhaps some finger pointing when violations do occur. Well, the police say it's not us, it's RSPCA, send them out, and they kind of wash their hands of the whole thing. And there's really nobody accountable or responsible for enforcing the laws in the way there is, for example, in the US or other Western countries where there are laws in place dictating how animals can be treated and handled, and those laws are enforced by law enforcement as any other laws are. Let's look at some specifics, starting with chickens. As Peter Stevenson noted for us tonight, battery cages were banned in the European Union in 1999, and the phase out of that will be complete as of next January 1st. We're not even close to having a ban here in Australia, although interestingly, Coles supermarket chain has announced they will phase out caged eggs from their own brand by 2013. So it looks like, in this case, retail marketers have stepped in where industry and government have not, to ensure the welfare. And you can bet they've probably done that because it's a good business decision related to what consumers are demanding at this point, that their eggs come from a process that doesn't involve harming the chickens. Staying with chickens for broilers or meat chickens, the EU, as Peter said, sets a maximum density of about 19 chickens per square meter, if you can imagine what that must look like. Certainly not desirable. We're pretty close to that in Australia as there, so there's some symmetry there between Australia and the EU. Moving to pigs. In 1991, the EU banned the tethering of sows, as Peter described, tying them by the neck or the belly with heavy chains to keep them in place. They were banned in 1991. The ban actually took effect until 2006. And as we're seeing here with these gap in dates, it could be anywhere from 10 to 12 years or more between the time these bans are enacted and when they actually take effect, which presumably takes into account a period of time where, in the case of battery cages, they are worn out and are phased out and then not replaced. It sort of gives the industry and the farmers time to catch up and make the revisions over the course of these years as they're phased out. That's why you see such a long period of time between the happy day that these things are banned and the actual day when they stop being used. Here in Australia, the model code for pigs does ban tethering of pigs, so we're on par with the EU as far as that goes. Sow stalls were banned in the EU in 2001, as Peter mentioned. That ban takes effect in January of 2013, so just a year and a half from now. Here, Tasmania, the state has banned sow stalls effective in 2017. They are the only state that's done so far. The model codes for pigs will ban sow stalls as of 2017. And interestingly, the pork industry, perhaps seeing the writing on the wall, has itself agreed to ban sow stalls as of 2017. Again, giving themselves a nice and lengthy period to enact the phase out. Here again, though, it's Coles supermarkets taking the lead, promising that its own Coles brand of pork products will be produced sow stall free by the end of 2014, 3 years earlier than the actual code banned or APL banned. The practice of tail docking, which Peter described for you, was prohibited in the EU in 2003. In Australia, the Pig Code provides that tail docking, quote, should be avoided whenever possible. The loopholes there, I think, are large enough anyone can imagine. Similarly, with castration, If it involved the tearing of tissues, it's been prohibited in the EU since 2003. And surgical castration is banned there as of 2018, and in the meantime can only be done with anesthetic or analgesia. Here in Australia, the Pig Code lays out a number of requirements for surgical castration, including that it be done by a trained operator and a sharp implement, well, thank goodness for that, but makes no mention of pain relief, shockingly. For cattle, veal crates in the EU were banned in 1997, not at all here. In the EU, calves must be kept in groups from age of 8 weeks forward. Here in Australia, the code says cows should be kept in groups unless disease control measures apply. Again, a huge loophole you could probably put a cow through. The use of antibiotics. As Peter mentioned, they're bad for animals and people and were banned for use as a growth promoter in the EU in 2006, although they may still be used there to treat actual diseases. There's been no legislation here yet on the use of antibiotics. In general, we tend to see factory farms here addressing undesirable animal behavior first by attacking the symptoms, like pecking or tail chewing, rather than the cause, which means addressing the stress and overcrowding and changing the conditions for animals, and that's unfortunate. And like the EU, change here comes slowly and has a tendency to advance with the least amount of change in the longest amount of time. Hopefully, Voiceless's lecture series will help motivate Australians to kickstart so many of the reforms still needed here on behalf of animals' welfare. Thank you.